The noose swayed empty in the November wind above Yosemite, California, and Flora Langford pressed both hands against her belly, feeling the flutter of life inside her, even as they lowered her husband's body from the gallows. The year was 1872, and the gold rush had brought more than fortune seekers to these mountains. It had brought thieves, liars, and men who would kill for a few ounces of dust. Thomas Langford had been one of those men, though Flora had not known it when she married him 6 months ago. She had been 19 then, fresh from Boston, answering an advertisement for a bride. Now she was 20, widowed and 4 months pregnant with nowhere to go. The crowd dispersed quickly after the hanging, as if death was contagious. Flora stood alone in the dusty street, her black dress borrowed from the preacher's wife, her few possessions in a carpetbag at her feet. The November air bit through the thin fabric, and she shivered, wondering if she would freeze before she starved. The boarding house had already told her she could not stay without payment, and Thomas had left nothing but debts and a reputation that now clung to her like smoke. "Madam." The voice came from behind her, low and careful. "You should not be standing out here in the cold." Flora turned to see a tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer sky. He was perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly, and there was something gentle in the way he looked at her, as if he saw past the black dress and the shame to the frightened girl beneath. "I have nowhere else to go," Flora said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Inside, she felt like she was falling, tumbling down into darkness with nothing to catch her. The cowboy glanced at the gallows, then back at her. "Your husband?" "Yes," she would not cry. She had done enough crying in the cell when Thomas had confessed everything, when he had begged her forgiveness for dragging her into this mess. "I did not know what he was. I thought he was a merchant. Most men are good at hiding what they do not want seen." The cowboy settled his hat back on his head and picked up her carpetbag. "My name is Warren Harper. I work at the Double J Ranch about 5 miles west of here. The owner, Mrs. Jensen, is a widow herself. She might have worked for you if you are willing." Flora stared at him. "Why would you help me?" "Everyone else in this town looks at me like I am a criminal too." Warren's jaw tightened. "Because I watched them hang a boy once for stealing a horse he did not steal. I was 14, too young to do anything about it, too scared to speak up. I am not that boy anymore. And you should not have to pay for crimes you did not commit." Something in his voice, in the old pain that shadowed his eyes, made Flora believe him. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and followed him to where 2 horses were tied outside the general store. He helped her mount the gentler mare, his hands careful and respectful, then swung onto his own gelding with the easy grace of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. They rode west in silence, climbing into the foothills where pine trees grew thick and the air smelled of snow and resin. Flora had never been on a horse for more than a few minutes and her back ached, but she did not complain. The town fell away behind them, and with it, the gallows and the staring eyes and the weight of shame. Here in the mountains, with the wind in her face and the vast sky overhead, she could almost believe she might survive this. The Double J Ranch sat in a valley between 2 ridges, a sprawling collection of buildings surrounded by pastures where cattle grazed. The main house was built of logs, solid and weathered, with smoke rising from 2 chimneys. Warren led her to the front porch and knocked, then stepped back as the door swung open. Mrs. Jensen was a woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that had seen hardship and come through it stronger. She looked Flora up and down with shrewd eyes, then glanced at Warren. "What have you brought me, Warren? "A woman who needs work and a place to stay," Warren said simply. "Her husband was hanged this morning in Yosemite. She is alone." Mrs. Jensen's expression softened slightly. "Come inside, girl. You look half frozen." She held the door wider, and Flora stepped into the warmth, feeling the heat of the fire like a blessing on her cold skin. The house smelled of bread and coffee, and for the first time in weeks, Flora felt something like hope stir in her chest. Mrs. Jensen poured coffee and set out thick slices of bread with butter while Warren stood by the fire, his hat in his hands again. Flora ate slowly, trying not to wolf down the food like a starving animal, though she felt like one. When she finished, Mrs. Jensen folded her arms and said, "I will be plain with you. I need help with the house and the chickens and the garden. I had a girl, but she got married and moved to Sacramento last month. The work is hard and the pay is not much, but you will have a room and 3 meals a day. Is that acceptable?" "Yes," Flora said, and then, because Mrs. Jensen deserved honesty, "I should tell you that I am with child. 4 months." Mrs. Jensen nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. You have that look about you. Well, you can work until it gets too difficult and then we will figure something else out. I will not turn away a woman in need, especially not one carrying a baby." Flora felt tears burn her eyes, and this time she did not try to stop them. "Thank you. I will work hard, I promise. I believe you will." Mrs. Jensen stood and gestured toward the stairs. "Warren, help her bring her bag up to the back bedroom. Then get back to work before the other men think you are shirking." Warren carried Flora's carpetbag up the narrow stairs and set it on the bed in a small, clean room with a window overlooking the valley. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "If you need anything, madam, just ask. We are all decent folk here." "Thank you, Mr. Harper," Flora said softly. "You saved my life today." Warren shook his head. "I just gave you a chance. What you do with it is up to you." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs, and Flora sank onto the bed, feeling the exhaustion of the past days crash over her like a wave. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that was almost soothing. Flora rose before dawn to help Mrs. Jensen with breakfast for the ranch hands, then spent her mornings cleaning and mending and tending the chickens. In the afternoons, she prepared vegetables from the root cellar and helped with the baking. The work was hard, but it was honest, and no one looked at her with judgment or disgust. The ranch hands were polite and respectful, tipping their hats when they saw her, and Mrs. Jensen treated her with a brisk kindness that felt like safety. Warren was different. He did not avoid her, but he did not seek her out either. He was simply there, a steady presence at the edges of her new life. He fixed the latch on her bedroom door when it stuck. He brought her a warmer coat when the snows came. He asked quietly how she was feeling and listened when she answered. Flora found herself watching for him, noticing the way he moved, the way he smiled at something one of the other hands said, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. It confused her, this noticing. Thomas had been dead less than 2 months, and she was carrying his child. She should not be thinking about another man, but she was. December brought heavy snows to the mountains, and the ranch turned inward, the men keeping close to the barns and the house. Flora's belly grew rounder, and Mrs. Jensen let out her dresses and made her sit down more often. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Jensen roasted a goose and made apple pie, and the ranch hands came to the house for dinner. They sat around the long table, passing food and telling stories, and Flora felt something she had not felt in a long time: belonging. Warren sat across from her, and once when she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and frightening and impossible to ignore. Flora looked away first, her heart pounding and focused on her plate. After dinner, Warren found her in the kitchen, washing dishes. He picked up a towel and started drying, working beside her in comfortable silence. Finally, he said, "Mrs. Jensen told me your baby is due in April." "Yes," Flora said, her hands stilling in the soapy water. "I do not know what I will do then. I cannot expect her to keep me on with an infant." "She will," Warren said with certainty. "Mrs. Jensen has a soft heart under all that toughness, but if she does not, there are other options." Flora glanced at him. "What options?" Warren set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her. His expression was serious, almost solemn. "I have been thinking about this for a while now, and I want to say it plain so there is no confusion. I would marry you, Flora. I would give your baby my name and raise the child as my own. I am not a rich man, but I have savings and I am a good worker. I could provide for you both." Flora stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "You barely know me. Why would you do such a thing?" "I know enough," Warren said quietly. "I know you are brave and kind and that you work hard without complaining. I know you did not deserve what happened to you. And I know that when I see you, something in me settles, like I have been searching for something all my life and just now found it." He paused, and color rose in his cheeks. "I am not asking you to love me. I am just asking you to let me take care of you and your baby. The rest can come in time if it comes at all." Flora felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I cannot ask that of you. It is too much." "You are not asking. I am offering." Warren reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. The touch was so tender it made her ache. "Think about it. There is no hurry, but I wanted you to know the offer stands." Flora thought about it all through the long winter. She thought about it when Warren brought her tea on cold mornings. She thought about it when he sat with her in the evenings, reading aloud from the newspaper or teaching her to play checkers. She thought about it when he talked about his plans to save enough money to buy his own land someday, to build a house and raise horses. He spoke of the future as if it was something real and possible, and Flora found herself wanting to be part of that future. By February, she had made her decision. She found Warren in the barn one evening, checking on a mare that was due to foal. He looked up when she entered, and she saw hope flash across his face before he could hide it. "I would like to accept your offer," Flora said, her voice steady despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. "If it still stands." Warren set down the brush he was holding and crossed to her in 3 long strides. He took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "It stands. It will always stand." "I cannot promise to love you right away," Flora said honestly. "My heart is still healing." "I know," Warren said. "And I am willing to wait, for however long it takes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Yosemite, with Mrs. Jensen and 2 of the ranch hands as witnesses. Flora wore a dress Mrs. Jensen had made for her, pale blue with white lace at the collar, and Warren wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut and his face clean shaven. When the preacher said they could kiss, Warren leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, soft and brief and full of promise. Warren had saved enough money to rent a small cabin on the edge of the Jensen property, and he carried Flora over the threshold that evening with a grin that made him look years younger. The cabin was tiny, just 2 rooms and a loft, but he had spent the past 2 weeks getting it ready. There were curtains on the windows, a quilt on the bed, and a fire burning in the hearth. Flora looked around at the simple, clean space and felt her throat tighten. "It is not much," Warren said, suddenly uncertain, "but it is ours." "It is perfect," Flora whispered and meant it. That night they lay in bed together, Warren's arm around her shoulders, Flora's head on his chest. He was careful not to press too close, not to assume anything, but Flora found comfort in his warmth, in the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Tell me about your family, she said into the darkness. Warren was quiet for a moment. There is not much to tell. My parents died of cholera when I was 12. I had a sister, Lily, but she died of fever 2 years later. I have been on my own since then, working ranches, saving what I could. I am sorry, Flora said softly. It was a long time ago. Warren's hand moved gently through her hair. What about you? My parents wanted me to marry a banker's son in Boston, Flora said, but I wanted adventure. I wanted to see the West. So I answered Thomas's advertisement and they disowned me for it. I have not heard from them since I left. Their loss, Warren said firmly. You are worth 10 of any banker's son. Flora smiled against his chest. You do not know that. Yes, I do. March brought the first signs of spring to the valley. The snow melted in patches, revealing green grass beneath, and the cattle grew restless in their pastures. Flora's belly was large now, making movement awkward, and Warren fussed over her constantly, refusing to let her carry anything heavy or work too hard. It annoyed her and touched her in equal measure. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she protested one morning when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I know that, Warren said, taking the basket from her hands anyway. But I also know you will push yourself too hard if I let you. Let me take care of you, Flora, please. She sighed and sat down on the porch steps, watching as he hung the washing with careful efficiency. He had grown dear to her over these past months, this kind, steady man who had stepped into her life when she needed someone most. She found herself watching him the way she had in those early days, but now there was warmth in the watching, affection that grew stronger each day. She was not sure if it was love yet, but it felt like it might be, given time. The baby came on a warm night in mid-April, when the stars were bright overhead and the air smelled of wildflowers. Warren rode for the midwife in town, while Mrs. Jensen stayed with Flora, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Flora was certain she could not do it, could not bear another minute of the pain. But then she thought of Warren riding through the darkness for her, of the cabin waiting with its curtains and quilt, of the life she was bringing into the world, and she found the strength to push through. The baby was born just before dawn, a boy with dark hair and a lusty cry. The midwife cleaned him and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Flora's arms. Flora looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes blinking up at her, and felt her heart crack open with love so fierce it hurt. Warren came into the room a moment later, his face pale with worry. Flora. Are you all right? I am fine, Flora said, smiling through her tears. Come meet your son. Warren crossed the room slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. He looked down at the baby and something shifted in his expression, something deep and profound. Your son, he said softly. Not mine. Ours, Flora corrected and held the baby out to him. If you still want him. Warren took the baby with gentle hands, cradling him against his chest. The baby quieted immediately, as if he recognized safety when he felt it. Warren looked at Flora with eyes that shone with unshed tears. I want him. I want both of you, more than anything in this world. They named the baby Samuel after Warren's father. Samuel Warren Harper, a name that spoke of new beginnings and hope. Warren was besotted from the first moment, getting up in the night to walk the floor when Samuel cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that made Flora laugh. Watching him with the baby, Flora felt the last walls around her heart crumble. One evening in May, when Samuel was sleeping in his cradle and the spring air was soft through the open window, Flora found Warren sitting on the porch, looking out at the darkening valley. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I love you, she said quietly. Warren turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like joy. "You do not have to say that. I told you I would wait." "I am not saying it because I have to," Flora said, taking his hand. "I am saying it because it is true. I love you, Warren Harper. You are a good man, a good father, and I am grateful every day that you walked into my life." Warren cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deep and slow and full of all the feelings he had been holding back. Flora kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, all the gratitude and affection and growing love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have loved you since that first day," Warren said roughly. "When I saw you standing there alone, so brave and scared at the same time, I knew then that I would do anything to keep you safe." "You have," Flora whispered. "You have given me a life I never thought I would have. A home. A family." They sat together on the porch as the stars came out, Warren's arm around Flora's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. Inside, Samuel made a small sound in his sleep, and Flora smiled. This was her life now. This man, this baby, this little cabin in the valley. It was not what she had imagined when she left Boston, but it was so much better. The months that followed were some of the happiest Flora had ever known. Samuel grew quickly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. Warren taught him to laugh by making silly faces, and Flora taught him to reach for things by dangling toys above his head. They worked together, Warren taking on extra jobs to save money, Flora helping Mrs. Jensen and taking in mending to earn a bit extra. It was hard work, but they were building something together, something solid and real. In August, Warren came home with news that made Flora's heart leap. "I put a down payment on land," he said, his face alight with excitement. 50 acres just north of here with a creek running through it and good grazing. It will take a few years to pay it off, but it is ours, Flora, our own place." Flora threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "Truly, our own land, truly." Warren spun her around, then set her down gently, mindful of Samuel sleeping in his cradle. "I am going to build us a house there. A real house, with room for Samuel to grow and maybe more children someday if we are blessed." "More children," Flora repeated softly. She had not let herself think that far ahead, but now she found she liked the idea. "I would like that." That autumn, Warren began clearing the land in his spare time, cutting trees and hauling away rocks. Flora packed him lunch each day and sometimes came with him, bringing Samuel in a basket. She loved watching Warren work, loved the way his muscles moved under his shirt, the way he paused to wipe sweat from his face and smile at her. He was hers, this good, strong man, and she was his. It felt like a miracle. Winter came again, and with it, Flora discovered she was pregnant. This time there was no fear, only joy. Warren picked her up and spun her around when she told him, then immediately set her down and apologized, worried he had been too rough. Flora laughed and kissed him, and they celebrated quietly in the cabin while Samuel played with wooden blocks on the floor. The new baby, a daughter they named Grace, was born the following summer on a day so hot the air shimmered. She had Flora's light hair and Warren's blue eyes, and she came into the world with a determined squall that promised she would be trouble. Samuel, now a toddler of 16 months, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her and hold her constantly. Warren built a larger cradle to accommodate 2 children, and Flora sewed tiny dresses and bonnets. By the time Grace was 6 months old, Warren had finished the house on their new land. It was a simple structure, but solid and well built, with 3 bedrooms and a big kitchen with windows that looked out over the valley. They moved in on a bright October day, carrying their few possessions and setting them down in rooms that echoed with emptiness and possibility. "We will fill it," Warren said, pulling Flora close as they stood in the empty parlor. Samuel clung to Warren's leg, and Flora held Grace in her arms. "With furniture and children and memories, this is just the beginning." Flora looked around at the bare walls and rough floors and felt a swell of happiness so intense it took her breath away. 4 years ago, she had stood in the street in Yosemite, widowed and pregnant and alone. Now she stood in her own house, surrounded by love, with a husband who adored her and 2 beautiful children. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing new challenges and joys. They added to the house, building a barn and a corral. Warren bought horses and began breeding them, developing a reputation for quality animals. Flora planted a garden and fruit trees, and learned to make cheese and preserve food for the winter. Samuel grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. Grace was as determined as her birth had promised, fearless and bright, always asking questions and exploring. 2 more children came, another son, James, and then a daughter, Rose. The house rang with laughter and arguments and the constant noise of a growing family. There were hard times too. A winter when sickness swept through and they nearly lost James. A summer when the creek ran dry and they had to haul water from the river. But they faced each challenge together, Warren and Flora, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren took Flora on a picnic to the spot where he had first decided to buy the land. The children stayed with Mrs. Jensen, who was older now but still spry, still running her ranch with an iron hand. Warren spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree and unpacked bread and cheese and wine. "You ever regret it?" Warren asked as they sat together, watching the sun sink toward the western mountains. "Marrying me, I mean, taking on all of this." Flora looked at him in surprise. "Regret it? Warren, you saved my life. You gave me a home and a family. How could I ever regret that?" "I worry sometimes that you only married me because you had no choice," Warren admitted, his eyes on the horizon. "That if circumstances had been different, you would have chosen someone else." Flora took his face in her hands and turned him to look at her. "Warren Harper, you listened to me. I married you because you were kind when everyone else was cruel, because you saw me as a person, not a problem, because you made me feel safe. And I stayed married to you because I fell in love with you, not with what you could give me, but with who you are. You are the best man I have ever known, and I thank God every day that you walked into my life." Warren's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you, Flora. More now than I did 10 years ago, and I did not think that was possible." "I love you too," Flora whispered, and kissed him as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. They made love that evening under the stars, slow and tender and full of the deep knowing that came from years of sharing a life. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the creek burble and the wind whisper through the trees. "You ever think about Thomas?" Warren asked quietly. Flora considered the question. She thought about that young man she had married, the one who had smiled so easily and lied so smoothly. She thought about the fear and anger she had felt when she learned the truth, the grief and shame after he died. But all of that felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. "Sometimes," she said honestly, "but not the way I used to. I am grateful to him in a strange way, because if he had not done what he did, I never would have met you. Samuel would not exist. Grace and James and Rose would not exist. Our life would not exist, so I suppose I forgive him wherever he is." "You have a generous heart," Warren said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I have a full heart," Flora corrected. "Because of you." When Samuel turned 18, he announced his intention to join the cavalry. Warren was proud and terrified in equal measure, and Flora tried not to cry as she packed his trunk. But Samuel came home 2 years later, whole and healthy, with a young woman named Catherine whom he had met at a dance in Sacramento. They married and built a small house on the southern edge of Warren and Flora's property, and the family continued to grow. Grace married a schoolteacher and moved to San Francisco, where she wrote long letters home describing the bustle of the city and the strange fashions. James took over the horse breeding operation from Warren, expanding it and earning a reputation that stretched all the way to Nevada. Rose, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first women to attend medical school in California. She practiced in Yosemite, caring for miners and their families. Warren and Flora grew older together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with work. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by all they had weathered together. They spent their evenings on the porch of the house Warren had built, watching the sun set over the valley, talking about their children and grandchildren and all the years they had shared. On a warm evening in June of 1897, 25 years after they had met, Flora sat beside Warren and took his hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" she asked. "Every detail," Warren said. "You were wearing a black dress and looked like the bravest thing I had ever seen. I knew right then that I would do whatever it took to help you." "You did more than help me," Flora said softly. "You gave me a life. You gave Samuel a father. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again." Warren lifted her hand and kissed it. "You gave me purpose. Before you, I was just drifting, working and saving but never really living. You and the children, you gave me a reason to build something, to fight for something. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, one by one, filling the sky with light. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out in all directions. The house, the barn, the pastures where horses grazed. In the distance, they could see the lights of Samuel's house, and beyond that, the faint glow of Yosemite. It was a good life, Flora thought, a blessed life. Samuel came by the next morning with his eldest son, a boy of 15 who had Warren's eyes and Flora's smile. They worked together to mend a fence, 3 generations side by side, and Flora watched from the kitchen window with a full heart. This was what Warren had promised her all those years ago. A family, a home, a future. He had kept that promise in every way that mattered. That afternoon, after Samuel and his son had left, Flora found Warren in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal. It was the same barn where she had accepted his proposal all those years ago, though it had been expanded and improved many times since. Warren looked up when she entered and smiled, the same smile that had won her heart so long ago. "I was just thinking about the day you came in here and said you would marry me," Warren said, as if reading her mind. "I could not believe it. I thought for sure you would say no." "I almost did," Flora admitted, coming to stand beside him. "I was so scared. But something in me knew that you were the right choice, the only choice." Warren put his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "Best decision you ever made." Flora laughed and elbowed him gently. "Best decision we both made." They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses and the life they had built. Outside, the June sun shone bright and warm, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang. Flora leaned her head against Warren's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the strength of his arms around her. This man had kept his promise. He had raised Samuel as his own, had loved him and protected him and given him a good life. He had given Flora and all their children a good life. He had been everything a husband and father should be, and so much more. As the years continued to pass, Warren and Flora became fixtures in the community, respected and loved by everyone who knew them. People came to them for advice, for help, for the simple comfort of their presence. They never turned anyone away, always remembering what it felt like to be desperate and alone. When Warren turned 70, the family threw a celebration that drew people from all over the county. The house and yard filled with neighbors and friends, with children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. There was food and music and laughter, and as the sun set, Warren pulled Flora into his arms and danced with her in the yard, their movements slow but sure, their eyes locked on each other. "Thank you," Warren said as they swayed together, "for saying yes, for staying, for loving me." "Thank you," Flora replied, her eyes bright with tears, "for being my hero, for being the father Samuel needed, for being mine." They kissed then, surrounded by their family and friends, and the cheers and applause that rose around them were full of joy and love. This was what happily ever after looked like, Flora thought. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real life built day by day, moment by moment, with love and faith and hard work. Samuel stood at the edge of the crowd with his wife and children, watching his parents dance. He thought about the man who had hung from the gallows before he was born, the man whose blood ran in his veins but who had never held him, never loved him. And then he thought about Warren, who had chosen him, who had raised him, who had taught him everything that mattered. There was no question in Samuel's mind who his real father was. Warren Harper was his father in every way that counted, and Samuel would spend the rest of his life trying to be half the man Warren was. As the celebration wound down and the guests departed, the family helped clean up, working together with the ease of long practice. Warren and Flora sat on the porch, watching their children and grandchildren move through the house, and Flora felt a swell of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Warren asked, concerned. "I am just happy," Flora said, wiping her eyes. "So incredibly happy." "Look at what we built, Warren. Look at our family." Warren looked, and his own eyes grew misty. "We did all right, did we not?" "We did more than all right," Flora said firmly. "We did something amazing." In the years that followed, Warren's health began to fail. Nothing dramatic, just the slow decline of a body that had worked hard for 8 decades. Flora cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her all those years ago, making sure he was comfortable, reading to him, sitting with him for hours. Samuel came by every day, as did the other children when they could, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to brighten Warren's days. On a quiet morning in early spring, with the valley green and the wildflowers blooming, Warren woke in their bed and looked at Flora beside him. She was still beautiful to him, even with her white hair and lined face. She was the woman who had stood alone in front of the gallows, the woman who had agreed to be his wife, the woman who had built a life with him. She was his heart, his home, his everything. "I love you," Warren said softly, and Flora opened her eyes and smiled at him. "I love you too," she replied, taking his hand. They lay together in the early morning light, and Warren felt a deep peace settle over him. He had lived a good life. He had loved well and been loved in return. He had kept his promises, every single one. There was nothing left undone, nothing left unsaid. He closed his eyes, Flora's hand warm in his, and let himself rest. Warren passed peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by his family, with Flora holding his hand until the very end. The grief was profound, but so was the gratitude. He had lived to be 83, had seen his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren thrive, had built something that would last long after he was gone. It was a good death, everyone agreed, the kind of death a man earned by living well. They buried Warren on a hill overlooking the valley, under a spreading oak tree. The whole county came to the funeral, testament to the impact he had made. Samuel gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had chosen to be his father, who had loved him without hesitation or condition. Grace and James and Rose all spoke too, sharing memories and tears, celebrating a life well lived. Flora stood by the grave long after everyone else had left, looking down at the fresh earth. She thought about the 25 years they had shared, the love and laughter and occasional tears. She thought about the cowboy who had offered to marry a pregnant widow because it was the right thing to do, and who had ended up giving her everything she had ever wanted. "Thank you," Flora whispered to the wind, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for being mine." She lived for another 5 years after Warren died, years spent surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the Wild West as it used to be, about courage and kindness, and the power of choosing love. When Flora finally passed on a cold December night, she went with a smile on her face, knowing she would see Warren again. They buried her beside Warren on the hill, and on the shared headstone, Samuel had inscribed, "Warren and Flora Harper. Together they built a life of love." Below that, Samuel added his own words, "To the man who chose to be my father and the woman who was always my mother. Thank you." The house and land passed to James, who continued the horse breeding operation and added cattle. The property stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what Warren and Flora had built together. Their story became legend in Yosemite, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of a pregnant widow and a cowboy who had promised to raise her baby as his own, and who had ended up creating something beautiful and lasting. Years later, Samuel's great-grandson would stand on that same hill overlooking the valley and think about his ancestors, about Flora standing alone in front of the gallows, and Warren stepping forward to help her. He thought about the courage it must have taken for both of them, the faith and hope and love. And he understood, in a way he never had before, what it meant to build a legacy. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and the wind whispered through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, horses whinnied and cattle lowed, and the sounds of life continued. The love that Warren and Flora had shared, the family they had created, the kindness they had shown to each other, and to everyone they met, all of it lived on, woven into the very fabric of the land and the people who called it home. It was a happily ever after that stretched beyond death, beyond time, a story that would never truly end because it had been built on a foundation of love so strong nothing could shake it. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest gift Warren Harper had given Flora Langford that cold November day in 1872, when he had offered her hope and a future and a chance at happiness.